Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to our third Reform press conference in as many days. So, look, it's clear Britain is broken. Britain needs reform. Britain is not working. And one of the things that is not working is the enormous accumulation and growth in PIP payments in this country. Now, reform will have sweeping welfare reforms that we will announce in the coming months and years. And you can expect a Nigel Farage Prime Ministership to transform welfare in this country. We're starting by announcing something today with regards to PIP, which staggeringly now accounts for 1% of UK GDP. Not UK public spending, 1% of GDP is being spent on PIP. We are betraying our young people. We'll talk more about that. The caseload, new claimants for under 25s in this country on PIP have tripled in 5 years. So we are betraying our young people. Reassessments are basically not happening anymore. So these young people are being labelled, they're being basically tossed onto a scrap heap for the rest of their lives. There's nothing about that we are remotely willing to accept. So we have some solutions to these problems which we want to talk about today. Before that, I'm going to hand over to Lee Anderson.
Thank you. And personal independent payments, they are now the largest component of disability benefits in the UK, and that's 25.7 billion spent just on PIP alone over the last year. And this is projected to rise to 33.5 billion by 2028. The figures are truly staggering. And a lot of this is actually being driven by the increasing number of claims for mental illness. And Reform UK, under the leadership of Nigel Farage, will tackle this head on. And many of you will have heard about the alarm clock generation from people like Nigel, myself and Zia and Richard. Well, I'm part of that generation, a generation of people who actually got up in the morning listening to their parents' alarm clocks go off. It was the same for me. I used to listen to my dad's alarm clock go off in the morning at 5 o'clock, and then he went to do a shift at the local pit. And for me, this was the best education a young man could get. It taught me that if you want to live a good life in a great country, then you must do your bit. You must get up in the morning and go to work for your family, for your community, and for your country. And it also taught me that hard work pays. It can provide you with the good things in life. It can also lead to a longer and healthier life, and more importantly, make you feel like you've got a stake in society. I think we all want that. We all want to feel good about ourselves and do our bit for our country. But now we're in a situation where the alarm clock isn't heard as often as it should be, and the alarm clock generation is now being replaced by an anxiety generation. A generation of young people that can forget about getting up in the morning and going to work and instead stay at home all day, courtesy of the taxpayer-funded employment support allowance and personal independent payments. And the people bearing the brunt of this cost are the very same people who still use an alarm clock and get up for work in the morning, and it's not fair. Over 1.4 million people in this country claim PIP for some sort of psychiatric disorder in the UK. A third of those are for mixed anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, and anxiety disorders. And the symptoms of these disorders can include persistent worrying, sadness, irritability, difficulty concentrating, and changes in sleep or appetite. Now, who in this room hasn't suffered from any of the above symptoms? Persistent sadness. Tell me about it. I've had persistent sadness since July last year with this awful Labour government, and over the next 4 years there'll be many more people having persistent sadness and wanting to put a claim in for PIP, but we're going to meet that head on. And we must ask ourselves if the above symptoms justify condemning someone to a life on benefits, because we know that the longer you are on benefits, then the less likely you are to get a job, and you will remain dependent on the state, because we also know that 85% of people on PIP do not work. Remember, if you're in a workless household and on PIP for anxiety, there are also other benefits that household is entitled to, and therefore other costs we must take into consideration, such as universal credit, which covers housing costs, council tax support, and not to mention employment support allowance. And we have the ludicrous situation where we could have two people on PIP in a household both claiming carers allowance for each other. It's absolute nonsense. As I said earlier, fewer than 1 in 6 people on PIP are in work. It's actually a de facto out of work benefit. For many people in this country, PIP is a necessary lifeline to be able to live a dignified life. But for some, sadly, it's an excuse not to go to work. 2 in 3 people on universal credit also claim PIP. Around 1 million are claiming PIP, universal credit, health and housing benefit. If you add the PIP, the universal credit, and the standard, if you add the PIP, universal housing and universal credit, health plus the standard allowance, you can take home up to £2,500 a year, more than someone on national minimum wage after tax and national insurance. That is simply not fair. The cost of the taxpayer runs into the billions and creates a culture within the household that it's okay not to go to work. It's okay to live off the state, and it's okay not to have an alarm clock. Well, it's not okay, and it's not fair. And it's not fair on those people who get up in the morning and go to work and put a shift in. If you're well enough to go to work, then claiming benefits should not be an option. We should all do our bit in this country to ensure that we pay into a system that helps people who are genuinely ill and disabled, rather than throw people on the scrap heap who could and should work. I believe that work is good for your mental health. It gives you a purpose, it provides a wage, it makes you feel part of a team, and it can give you confidence and a sense of pride, and help you to become a role model for your family and your community. And it can also give you friends for life. No tablet, no medication and no therapy can provide any of that. Therefore, a Reform UK government would fully remove those with anxiety disorders, but not serious psychiatric disorders, from PIP eligibility. This would save the Exchequer £3.2 billion per annum based on last year's figures. And we will also ensure that every single assessment is done face to face. Now, some of these figures that we present today, I believe, are quite conservative, because we have to look at the other income-based benefits as we help people go back to work. Some for the first time, by the way. We have 1 million people now out of work, young people out of work in this country, and much of that is being driven by mental health problems. And we cannot and must not allow our young people to be labelled as disabled because they may have the odd bout of anxiety. It's not fair on the taxpayer, and it's not fair on our young people. We are literally throwing them on the scrap heap, and we are forgetting about them. No responsible society would ever do that to its young people. Reform UK are committed to supporting the most vulnerable members of our society, but in order to do so, the able-bodied must put a shift in, go to work and pay their taxes to achieve this. And just think how much money this would actually save the NHS. It would unclog our doctors' surgeries, our GP surgeries. It would save literally billions. We want to live in a fair society which helps keep people in the workplace even when they're going through a difficult time. But at the same time, we must support our weak, our vulnerable and our elderly. That's what civilised societies do, and that's what Reform UK will do. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lee. So look, as Lee has pointed out, there are no doubt many people in this country who do have disabilities and do need assistance from the taxpayer. Our proposals continue to protect those people and ensure that they continue to receive those payments. But we have to again look at the extraordinary growth in PIP claims, which are now up to 1,300 per day. That is up from 500 per day in 2019. And one of the points that I want to make about the savings as a result of our proposals is these get bigger and bigger and bigger as you go out, because frankly, like many of the problems that ail this country, the problem compounds and compounds the further one goes out. We know we need to get more people back to work. And so what our proposals are here at Reform are to simultaneously fix the incentives to not work and fix the incentives to get people to work. As Lee pointed out, it is staggering that a household on PIP, Universal Credit Health, Universal Credit Housing and the Standard Allowance get to take home £2,500 more each year than somebody working full-time on the minimum wage. I mean, talk about making work pay. The successive Tory governments and now Labour have made not working literally pay far more than working. And the number of houses, the number of people who are on in such a situation, according to analysis from the Centre for Social Justice, is around about 1 million. Around about 1 million. So this is not a small problem. It's already a big problem, and it is getting bigger. So what are our solutions to this? Well, the first thing, as Lee has talked about, a real focus here are young people in this country, defined as those who are under 25. Another staggering statistic that people in this country should know and understand is that if we're to look at payrolls in this country, if you look at under 25s on payrolls, over the last 5 years, non-EU under 25s has gone up 315%. In that same time, UK citizens under 25 on payrolls have gone down. So you're comparing 315%, and that's just non-EU foreign nationals under 25, compared to a decline for UK citizens in that category. This is a catastrophe. And to compound, let us connect that with PIP, which, as Lee said, is a de facto out-of-work benefit. Fewer than 1 in 6 people receiving PIP are in work. Well, which category, which demographic is growing the fastest in terms of PIP claims? Under 25s, where new claimants have tripled. New claimants have tripled in that same 5-year time period amongst the under 25s. These are the problems that we are trying to solve. So what are we going to do? Firstly, we're going to move everyone back to face-to-face assessments. There is very much a sense of pre-COVID and post-COVID era in all of these problems. And you can see this in the data and the charts that our press team have shared with you, some of which are quite astounding and stark. Pre-COVID, the vast majority of assessments for PIP were face-to-face. That was perfectly normal and perfectly standard. Post-COVID, it completely inverted. Almost all of those assessments moved to remote. Now, that was understandable during the period of COVID itself. But here's the thing, unlike many countries around the world who've done this properly, that hasn't changed. Almost all of the assessments remain remote. And we know from data, from government data, that the success rate of getting onto PIP is meaningfully higher. It is 57% for face-to-face. It's 44% for face-to-face and 57% for remote. So we're going to move everyone back to face-to-face. That's the first thing. The second thing is we're going to end payments for non-serious anxiety disorders in terms of PIP and move those people onto a fast-track to work programme, which we've budgeted £500 million to be able to do for those around 500,000 people. In doing so, we are going to give them every chance of getting back into work and doing all of the things that Lee has talked about. And while, Lee's anecdotal evidence of his childhood is very powerful and him growing up, there's also an abundance of academic research cited in the press release that we've given you from countries like Holland in particular, but other countries as well in Europe, which have shown a very clear link between reforming disability benefits, getting people back to work programs, and far superior life outcomes for everybody involved. This is a win-win on every front. So those are the three things. We're going to move everybody back to face-to-face and end remote assessments. We're going to end non-serious anxiety disorder payments, and then simultaneously create a fast-track to work program to give those people every chance of getting back to work. How much will this save? Well, by 2029, it will save £9 billion per year, and the cumulative savings over the next 5 years, were these to be enacted now, and with a 12-month transition period baked into their calculations, is north of £30 billion. And that is before one takes into account any positive effects of people actually going back to work. If we were to assume that half of the people who are on those non-serious anxiety disorders were successfully to get back to work, that saving rises to £37 billion over the next 5 years. And again, if you were to look at it 10, 20 years, those numbers compound even more dramatically. So that is what reform is proposing. This will have a dramatic effect on the curve of growth on the welfare bill generally, which is obviously an enormous amount of money. It helps our young people get back into work. And I want to stress this too, that Nigel has already announced that when he's Prime Minister, we will of course end welfare payments to foreign nationals writ large. That is something we're doing. So this is, I just want to be crystal clear, on top of that. We know, we've said this before, we make no apology, Britain has sadly become a food bank for the world. A lot of the data around the cost of foreign nationals on welfare is hidden. The government doesn't disclose it. We do have some information, for example, on universal credit, and that is already staggering. So these are our proposals. We're proud to present them, and we'll take your questions. Thank you.
We're going to go first to Leila Natto of the BBC. Hi, Leila.
Where you'll draw the line in defining what is a non-major anxiety condition.
Yeah.
And also on the savings, what have you budgeted for the increased cost of face-to-face assessments and whether that will eat into your proposed savings? And the £500 million that you said you would invest in back-to-work support for those who would no longer receive PIP, is that a one-off investment? Because wouldn't that cohort of people need ongoing support over the years, presuming they still have that condition? Thank you.
Well, firstly, I'll talk about the illnesses first here, which we would probably disapply are things like schizophrenia, bipolar, PTSD and personality disorder. I think we can all accept that they are very serious mental health illnesses and that should be looked at completely different. So, yeah.
Yeah, so just be crystal clear when Lee says disapply, those would be unaffected by our proposals. So to give you the technical terms used by, or the labels used by the DWP, anxiety disorders, mixed anxiety and depressive disorders. Now, without going into too much detail, I heard there's some nuance because the data does not then break down some of those which would be categorised as serious and would be those people. It is unlikely they would be able to go back to work. So our assumptions are, we've worked with the Centre of Social Justice to come up with this forecast, around 20%, somewhere between 10 and 20% of those people, of those 500,000, we would expect to be recategorised into a different welfare category. For the others, on anxiety disorders, mixed anxiety and depressive disorders, there is an abundance of evidence in academic studies that they will have far better life outcomes by reforming welfare and putting them into back-to-work programmes. In terms of how much we're budgeting for the increased need for face-to-face. The first thing to say is this isn't something that the British state has not done before. It's not something that the DWP hasn't done before. This was being done routinely, where the vast majority of assessments were being done face-to-face pre-COVID. So we budgeted around £100 million for that. Frankly, that is a rounding error, big absolute number, but a rounding error in context of the £30 billion savings we're talking about. And in terms of the back to work, largely be talking therapy, it is a one-off cost that we have put in there. We acknowledge, that there might need to be more ongoing costs. But again, those numbers will pale into insignificance relative to the £30 billion of savings over the next 5 years, of the £9 billion a year annual savings that we will have by 2029.
Olivia Otley, GB News.
Hiya. Assessing seems to be right at the heart of this to try and work out who is seriously suffering from anxiety and who's not. Can I ask, who will do the assessing and how will you make sure that those people are incentivised to get people back to work? Because Fraser Nelson's documentary revealed that very junior civil servants are essentially being paid to get through as many claims as possible.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So part of our proposals will be to fix the assessment process. So that is one problem. So you've got to look at the incentives for the assessors who, not necessarily universally, but in a lot of cases, probably the majority of cases, are being incentivised on volume, not on perhaps the incentives that we would think about, A, for the life outcomes for the people involved, and for the taxpayer. The nice thing about this in some ways is that those two are very much aligned. The second problem you have is gaming of the system. So incredibly, the assessor handbook is online. Right, you can go and look up, go and watch YouTube videos. I mean, so if you're doing this remotely, it's kind of like doing your driving theory test and having the answers online for you. And so this is not to say, of course, that everybody is gaming the system on PIP. That's obviously not what we're saying. I want to be crystal clear about that. But we know that this is an issue, and I think credit to Fraser for the work that he's done on that. So we will look to reform those.
I think on that note, Zia, about gaming the system, we know it happens. Before I came into politics, I worked for Citizens Advice Bureau, and we were the first point of contact, really, for people who wanted to claim PIP or DLA, as it was at the time. And we used to fill the forms out for clients before that application form went in. And I can tell you now, we were gaming the system. It was a competition between the advisor, i.e. the person who was filling the form out, and the DWP. And I could tell you, I know people who work for the CAB that got 100% hit rate on a benefit form. I could take the fittest man in Ashfield, and we could get them 100% claim on DLA. That's how skillful the advisors were at filling these forms out. It has to stop. Next, we've got Harry Orton of the ITV.
Thank you very much. Some of these people claiming PIP will have been out of work for a very long time, and they say that because of their conditions, lots of employers won't take them on. What would you do to ensure that employers are willing to take people on who say they've got very complex needs and they've been out of work for a long time, and they won't be very attractive to many employers?
Yeah, so on that front, it is actually a really good point. So as part of broader welfare reforms that we will announce, because obviously we haven't talked about universal credit or many other aspects of welfare today, tax breaks for employers will be an important part of that to create the incentive. But we should draw attention to the 500,000 that we're talking about here, the 500,000 people. This is, again, low-level anxiety. So our assessment is that most of these people actually, in many cases, not all of them, just to be crystal clear, but in many, many cases, again, there's an abundance of literature on this, they are absolutely not only able to work, but it would be really good for them to do that.
Yes, I think, as I said in my short speech, Harry, I think one of the best medications for minor anxiety problems is a good day at work. You know what? You know, next week, we're going to be walking up to war memorials and placing wreaths to remember our glorious dead. And I'm sure many of them young men back in the day stood in those trenches. They were suffering from anxiety and worrying and scared of what was going to happen to them. But you know what? When that whistle went, they went over, didn't they? And they did it day in, day out. And the same as when I worked down the pit, it was dangerous, it was dark, it was dirty. And sometimes we were worried. But the following morning at 5 o'clock, we went back to work again. That was the best medication I've ever had. Yeah. Next, we have Noah from The Sun. Young Noah.
Hello, thank you. Today, The Sun launched our Save Our Vets campaign, which is in response to Labour-affiliated think tanks plotting to convince Rachel Reeves of a big tax raid of betting firms. And this industry employs 40,000 people and is also very much beloved by lots of working class people who like a flutter. So, Lee, in your constituency, what sort of impact would this terrible tax raid have? And Zia, I was wondering if you could just spell out a bit what the back to work programme and talking therapies would involve under your programme.
I'm sorry, I missed that, Noah, about the tax breaks. Say that again, please.
So Rachel Reeves in the Treasury is considering a big tax raid on the gambling industry. Yeah. And how would this impact your constituency, and what's your response to that? Yeah,
okay. Well, I don't think it's going to increase the amount of people that walk in the local Ladbrokes in my village, to be honest with you. I'm at a loss as to why Rachel Reeves would actually do this to the already struggling gambling industry. We've already seen people moving online to have their daily bets, going to any of my bookies on the High Street in Ashfield, and they are empty. The only sort of money they are taking is through the machines in the shop, and in fact I think some of the shops just opened to put machines in, but more and more people are going online to gamble, and it will definitely not help the people in my constituency who like to have the odd flutter, and I include myself in that.
And to your second question, well, the answer to that is to look at things that have worked across the world in this situation. And again, I want to emphasise this point. There is a huge amount of evidence that what we're proposing does work, and that is talking therapy. These are generally, obviously, not physical conditions. They are conditions which, by talking to an expert, helping them get into the psychological state where they feel able to get back to work and start, setting their alarm clock and waking up in the morning. All things everyone in this room does and understands are important. So that's what the programme will focus on.
Claire Ellicott, Daily Mail.
Hello. Michael Heseltine in the Times today has compared reform with Oswald Molesley and Enoch Powell. What's your response to that? And if I could ask, what role would you both play in a future reform government?
You're talking about Michael Heseltine? Yeah, well, this is a man who in 1992 announced the closure of over half the remaining coal mines in this country, and he said it was a deeply unpleasant thing to do. Well, I think he is deeply unpleasant saying these things about Reform UK. He needs to just shut up and go away. Is that plain speaking enough for you?
I have nothing to add to that.
What roles in Reform UK?
Well, this is going to be a question for Nigel. I'm really excited about the calibre of the people, not only who sit in Parliament already for reform, but also the sort of people I think we're going to be able to attract in terms of talent. We've already said, we've put on the record that we would expect a Nigel Farage cabinet to be smaller than it is now, because I don't think anyone sat in a meeting with 25 people, and it's been a really useful coordinated decision-making meeting. But also we would probably expect maybe half of those cabinet members to not be members of Parliament, so that we can maximise the available talent. So I think Nigel will make those decisions in time, but certainly my advice to him would be, let's wait until the pool of talent is as large as absolutely possible. Again, we're just going to relentlessly optimise, unlike what happens with the Tories and Labour, where the only qualification you need to get the highest office of the land is to carry an MP's bag around for a number of years, give them relatively low quality advice, and then choose the right leadership candidate at the right time. We're going to optimise for competence.
Mauricio, City AM. Hi, Mauricio.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. My question is about getting policies through. So obviously we saw a massive Labour rebellion, but we've also seen reports of division within reform-led councils. How would you ensure that the parliamentary candidates you select would back PIP proposals and other welfare reforms?
Well, isn't it strange, Zia, that I've been involved in politics about 12 years now, and I've sat on 2 different councils as a councillor, and I've never in my time as being a councillor or a member of Parliament known the mainstream media report on local councils as much as I have done since May this year. Zia?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that. And again, just to be clear, more than happy for reform politicians to be scrutinised. I think that's all correct and proper. The idea that there aren't disagreements inside any group of human beings, let alone elected officials within the same party, is obviously for the birds. But I will answer the question directly about, how do we generate cohesion amongst a future parliamentary class that is hopefully 350 to 400 reform MPs. Well, we called the previous manifesto, as it were, for the general election a contract with the people. And one of the things that I think makes the reform project unique, and I think gives it a unique opportunity for success, not just to win the next general election, but to actually turn the country around, is hopefully we will go from 5 MPs as we speak today to, as I said, potentially 400 MPs in one fell swoop. It's never happened before. Nothing close has happened before. But what that means is, after that day, should the British public choose to deliver that result, you now have a group of people who, at least it is really possible, they will be unified. And we're going to be very clear about what our manifesto is. We will ask and ensure that every single candidate, so they'll be selected, without doubt, based on believing in the values and the principles that manifesto represents, and what Nigel represents as our leader. But also, they will be shown the manifesto and basically told, look, if you want to stand for us, we are quite reasonably asking you to ensure that the democratic mandate delivered by the British people, if that's what they deliver, is upheld, and you have a moral obligation to do that. That's very different to the Tories, for example, who had one of the biggest issues that they had, and why they're headed now for extinction, no matter who the leader was or is because it's basically at least 2 parliamentary parties in one, maybe even 3. Probably 3. And so the only way, which is why that was never a soluble problem.
Max from the Times.
Thank you. My question to both of you is this it? I mean, in April 2024, when the Tories were in government, they launched a PIP review proposing basically this, and they repeated it at the party's conference. Restoring face-to-face assessments is this government's policy. It doesn't seem like, looking at the detail of this, that this goes any further than what has been proposed by the Tories and not too much further than Labour. So are you having any new ideas for how you're going to contain the huge rise in PIP, or will this be it?
I think the Tories should apologise actually for the amount of increased PIP claims that happened under their watch. It's absolutely skyrocketed, and at least we're being honest and frank, and we're having an honest discussion, especially about young people in this country, who I think we have betrayed. They're on the scrap heap now, 1 million young people. Meanwhile, non-EU nationals are coming into our country and scooping up all the best jobs, whilst our young people are left to rot on benefits. And for that, I think as a country, as a nation, we should hang our heads in shame. We are letting people down. So, yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And listen, again, the idea that the arsonists that burnt the house down are going to turn up with great proposals to build it again is just one of the most outrageous. And the fact that this is taken seriously, apparently. Every single data point we just gave you about the tripling of new applicants who are under 25 over the 5-year period, about the fact that PIP is now 1% of GDP. These are all indictments of that very same Tory government, many of whom are still sitting in the shadow cabinet, by the way. There hasn't even really been a serious change of personnel. So I'm sorry. What we're saying is not only are these our policies, these are things that we will actually do.
Ruby Klein, The Telegraph. Hi, Ruby.
Hi, morning. So given that you're including mixed anxiety and depression, are you expecting to reassess depression as a PIP category? Is that something in the horizons for you? And if you wouldn't mind, will Reform be backing the Tories' inquiry into alleged government interference into the Chinese super embassy planning proposal?
Well, firstly, on the PIP, there will be some people in the anxiety bracket who, well, they'll all be reassessed and they may go into a different group.
Yeah, and our estimate of that is around 10 to 20%. Again, the data is not exactly transparent to give us perfect analysis on that, but based on CSJ analysis, we think that's a reasonably conservative assumption. Again, the whole point of this is to ensure that those who can and have a real shot of going back to work do, while protecting people who do need taxpayer support. Lee, do you want to answer the question on the...
What was the other question? Sorry. Well, it should be looked at, yeah, definitely. Simple as that. Okay, next one, fresh from his social media break, Christian Calgie.
Thank you very much. One number that's set to be even more costly than PIP over the coming years, according to official projections, is the triple lock. So will Reform be coming out with proposed reforms to that, or are you entirely signed up to that for the foreseeable future? There have also been reports in the last day or so that Rachel Reeves has decided against ending tax breaks for the Motability scheme, which I think has become a sort of an exemplar of how insane the PIP system has become. These people getting BMWs and Mercedes on the taxpayer. So would you support ending those tax breaks, and would you even go further to crack down on who's getting those sort of cars?
Well, I think personally that the Motability scheme's got completely out of hand. 1 in 5, I think, new cars on the road now are a Motability car. I know people through doing this job and working at CAB before that will claim PIP, the higher rate mobility, for a family member, and that family member will never get to use that car apart from maybe once or twice a year. They go to the hospital in the car, and the rest of the time their family are driving about in a brand new BMW on their drive. It's not fair. And I think the chief exec of Motability gets about 500 grand a year. Where's that money coming from? It's supposed to be a charity. The chief financial officer gets about 400 grand a year. It's an absolute scandal, the Motability scheme is. I mean, I remember back in the day, if you were on disability and you wanted a car from the state, it was a blue 3-wheeler. Anybody remember those? What's wrong with that? Let's go back to that. You'll quote me on that, won't you, Calgie?
Yeah, and look, on the triple lock, Nigel's said it's something that he's going to look at across time.
Next one is Martin from Politico.
Hi, Martin Alfonso-Larsen from Politico. So the question I have is that YouGov polling in early July, when the government was pushing the welfare reforms, found that 40% of reform voters were actually opposed to them. Given that these reforms appear to go further, are you worried at all about a big public backlash to your plans?
Well, they've not heard our reforms yet, have they? So how can they be against them? Yeah, well, I don't think so. But nobody's heard our welfare reforms yet, so how could you be against them? Well, it's not cutting PIP benefits. It's getting people who are able-bodied back to work. You know, the genuine people who are disabled, suffering from some of these things like schizophrenia, bipolar, PTSD, and anxiety, and personality disorders, they will be kept on PIP and they will be supported. There's nothing. No, I'm not worried now. What I am worried about is the hard-working British taxpayer who gets up every morning, puts a shift in, and sees his taxes being paid to keep somebody off work. It's not fair. It's not fair on the British public, and we're not having it. Yeah.
Nothing to add to that.
Next one is Ellie from Guido.
Thank you. Zia, yesterday you, alongside Danny Kruger, said you wanted to reduce the size of the civil service. Can you name a specific quango, or department even, that you were looking to scrap to help you do that? And Lee, what is your response to Labour MP Dawn Butler circulating an open letter calling for Sarah Poitrin to be formally reprimanded by the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards over her comments on adverts?
Okay, so in terms of the civil service, look, we're taking this extremely seriously, and as much as it wouldn't create a great headline to give you a big number or a department that we're going to scrap or a new one we'd create, we are doing this really seriously. And as Dan put it really eloquently, Danny, he said, look, the first thing we're going to look at is what form it needs to be, that this needs to take. And we're going to be very first principles about this, meaning we're going to look at automation, we're going to look at how we can build a British state fit for the 21st century that we can be really, really proud of. And that is going to take some time. We don't have all of the answers yet. I will say this, though. If you look at how much money, the hundreds of billions that go into these quangos, one of the things that the Blair regime basically did was make it very difficult to prize apart the baby and the bathwater. You know, there's no doubt a huge amount of waste in there, way too many layers of management, way too many quasi-autonomous decision-making bodies. But within that, there are actually really important services and money needed for services that people rely on and things that are really important to quality of life for British people, which again goes back to why we've got to be really serious about this. But I promise you, as soon as we got some answers for you, we'll let you know.
And on your point, Ellie, about Dawn Butler, she's entitled to do what she wants. We've spoken enough about this week, and Nigel spoke about it, Zia spoke about it, Danny spoke about it, we've all spoken about it this week. So if Dawn Butler wants to do what she wants to do, then she's quite entitled to do it. Simple as that. Final one is Peter from The Guardian.
Hi. If I could return to the subject of Monday's press conference. At the press conference, Nigel was speaking about the 5 members of the grooming gangs panel who want Jess Phillips to stay in post. And he was saying that their views should be seen in the context of the fact that they were not survivors or grooming gangs, they were survivors of a different type of sexual abuse. Those 5 survivors have talked to a colleague of mine and said that he's got it completely wrong. They are all victims of Pakistani origin grooming gangs. Some of them have written memoirs about that. And they say the fact that Nigel was basically so casual in what he said, and the fact he didn't check with them and got it wrong, shows that he should say sorry to them, and he should also, it shows he doesn't really have any good ideas as to how grooming gangs inquiries should work. I mean, I'd have loved to have asked Nigel, but he left about 2/3 way through the questions. Would you have any response to that? Do you think Nigel should say sorry to them?
Well, I've not spoken personally to the 5 members. I would like to speak to them as well. And if that's the case, then we need to have a proper grown-up adult conversation with these people. As regards to what Nigel has said, that's up to Nigel. But we will speak to him later about that.
I had a question as well. Marie from the FT. I think most of my questions have been answered, really. But in terms of, you described some sort of behaviour for people who...
Say that again, please, sorry.
So earlier you described some sort of behaviour for people who has what you called non-serious anxiety disorders.
Yeah.
So you said things like, they're not getting up in the morning. Can you just, a bit deeper, explain what other sort of behaviour you would see from people who's suffering from that sort of disorder?
Well, no, what we said was the most serious conditions like schizophrenia, bipolar, PTSD and personality disorders, they're the ones that
I know, but people with non-serious anxiety disorders, what sort of behaviour would you see on a daily basis like with people who suffer from that sort of
like
disorder?
I said in my speech, how many people in this room wake up in the morning worrying about something? or get tired easy, or don't sleep properly. I think that's probably every single person in this room. And what we have to do when we assess these people is make sure this is not just normal, everyday human behaviour, which we all suffer with if it is suffering. It's just a way of life. We all suffer from stress. We all suffer from anxiety. We all worry about stuff. But is that a good enough reason to put a young person on benefits for the rest of their life? I think not.
Yeah, and look, I would just add to that, again, aside from, you know, the anecdotal evidence and things that we might feel in our day-to-day lives, the preponderance of academic literature on this subject shows that the best way of people, and again, the term is defined by DWP, anxiety disorders, mixed anxiety and depressive disorders, with the caveat that we appreciate there's a subsegment there that are serious and would be recategorized. The best thing for them is what we are proposing.
Thank you. That's done.
Cool. Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.